Welcome to this week's podcast. Today we talk about revival, the next generation, and what God is doing in the story of Free Church. So we're 1 year into the Free Church journey, and Amy, I would love to hear what are some of your highlights, a couple of highlights from this previous year.
Sure, it's kind of difficult to single things out. I think, I'd have to say that overall, just God's kindness. When you start a journey and you're not sure how things are going to work out, and are you going to be able to, do all the things you're supposed to do. But God has been so kind, just in my personal devotional time, in the stories we've seen, the people that have encountered Him and their lives have been changed, just in favor in all kinds of ways. With venue, we actually didn't have a venue and weren't sure where we were going to start. Just everything. God's absolute kindness has been the main highlight for me, I think.
I think for me, absolutely, there's been a thread of God's kindness and His grace and everything. And one of the highlights for me is seeing both the kids and the youth come alive. So Generation Z and those that are younger. Incredible amount of kids. I think our kids team is doing an incredible
and the youth team,
an amazing job at leading the kids in their personal walk with Jesus and the youth as well. Shout out to the youth team.
Yeah,
I think we've had, I don't know what it is. It must be just in the last while, somewhere between 10 and 15 or 20 kids and youth get baptized and make a declaration for Jesus. It's incredibly special.
Somebody shared a prophetic word about how they feel like our youth and our kids are going to be like little beacons of light, little lighthouses all over in classrooms and universities and wherever they find themselves. For their generation, they're going to be beacons of light.
Wow, it's amazing.
And when I got the message, I replied, and I was really emotional about it, because I said, I've always dreamed of a church where the kids and the youth are impacted, where it's not just an afterthought. It's not just and we must also do something for the kids. And we must also do something. But it's actually an intentional space where we want to create a place where the kids and the youth can thrive. And, to see that unfolding is an incredible blessing.
Yeah, it's almost like, can you hear the kids in the background? These kids outside, they know we're talking about them. It's almost like kids ministry and youth ministry should be the main focus of the church, and the meeting in the hall for the adults is just kind of that's a strategy to get the kids to come to kids' church.
Well, it really should be, because the adults should technically be willing to feed themselves, right? They should be empowered to know where to find.
It's that idea of you're responsible to devote yourself.
Yes. Whereas the kids, we need to guide them into getting to that place. Yeah. And understandably, some adults have never been discipled to the place where they can feed themselves, so that's why we have to have both. But our focus should be on teaching the children.
And especially now, I think in this current season after the pandemic, and just looking at the younger generations, anxiety, depression, isolation through the pandemic, mental health struggles and challenges, kind of like missing a place to belong, and all those kind of things. It's the younger generations have had, not to say the older generations haven't had a hard time, but in those formative years, there have been so many pressures upon those younger generations. So I think we have a key role to steward those younger generations well.
And part of that is the great joy for me is seeing our own children just fall in love with the church. I mean, they've always been in church since they were born, but there's been a greater level of ownership because James and Beth, our two older children, have started serving.
Yeah.
So there's this ownership where they say to me on Saturday, where am I serving tomorrow? And there's an anticipation and an excitement to serve Jesus and His church because they've fallen in love with the church.
Yeah, we have had to do a little bit of narrative correction, in especially in the beginning, because the kids were like, my mom and dad, they're the boss of the church. We're like, whoa, hold on. Yeah. Jesus is the boss of the church.
Or it's my mom and dad's church.
It's my mom and dad's church. No, this is Jesus' church and we get to be part of it. But they're catching on to that. And just something incredible seeing across the world what God is doing in the younger generations. And in Asbury, in the month of February, small town in Kentucky in the US, it seems like revival has begun to happen since the beginning of, 8th of February, normal chapel service going on. A guy was preaching, and by his own admission, not a very good message. He said he was kind of lazy in his preparation, preached the message, and afterwards some people felt led to pray, and about 15 people, so the story goes, and suddenly the presence of God arrived and showed up, and after that people began to flood back into the chapel, and there was like this incredible experience of God's presence, and turned into like spontaneous worship, and it went on for, I think, until about the 23rd of February. It just carried on like in non-stop moments of people experiencing the presence of God. And so here's the thing about it. It was all led by young people, by Generation Z. No big names, no hype.
And what I've realized from listening to things and looking into it is that what the catalyst was people hungry for Jesus. Not big hype, not like you say, just a simple chapel service, which led to people growing in their hunger for more of God, which led to an incredible manifestation.
I listened to a podcast by John Tyson where he said God shows up where he's wanted, and where there's a hunger and a desire for a thirst for God, he shows up. But it's just incredible that God shows up and begins to use young people who've battled with an overwhelm of digital technology, and there was like nothing digital involved in this, no promos or anything. A generation that battled with loneliness and isolation, and suddenly they found a place to belong, battled with anxiety and experienced the presence of God. So just love the realness and the rawness, the authenticity of what's happening there.
The snippets I've seen of it, it's been of young students sharing their testimony of what God had done in those days that they'd been there, and kids driving from other parts of the country to be there, and finding themselves healed, like emotionally healed.
Amazing.
In God's presence, and finding themselves in awe of who God is. So a renewed, maybe salvation for the first time, but for some, I watched the one kid saying, I'm a pastor's kid, and kind of got tired of all this. And actually, I came here to find God again, and I can tell you that He's real. And that was just unhyped. This is a kid that's probably known about God his whole life, but has had this incredible encounter with the presence of the living God and has changed. And, just starts to speak. So say, guys, this is real. This isn't made up. This isn't hype. This is who God is.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful, so simple.
Yeah, and the amazing thing about that particular location is if you look back over the past kind of 100 years in church history, and when there have been big revival moments, something has always happened at that location. So it's not to say God always has to do the same thing again, but if history is anything to go by, like God is up to something in the world amongst the younger generation. And could this be the beginning of the biggest revival that we've seen, like the days that we've prayed for? And could this be it?
Yeah.
And I guess one of the things with something happening in another place is there's always the skeptics and some confusion about like what's really going on. Could this actually be... And in some ways, there's I suppose a desire in those who are not there to go like, oh, why can't it be us? Why isn't God using us? Why has He picked that place? And I think the best thing that we can do is just focus on our own devotion to God and to cultivate our own hunger and desire.
Yeah, it's interesting because this week I've rattled and rolled with, I've got lots of things on my to-do list, and as we all do, and kind of the temptation is to skip out on the personal devotion. I'll just have a quick one. I'll just quickly pray. And I've actually forced myself to have a longer devotion time than maybe last week or the week before. And I suppose experiencing revival in my own heart. The more time I'm spending, the more time I'm actually desiring to spend.
Yeah.
And that would be like my encouragement to you guys is just show up to spend time with God, not out of a religious act, but out of Jesus, I just want to be with you, and whatever that looks like, prayer or Bible reading or journaling or all of the above.
That's very good.
Just showing up is changing something in me. That revival needs to happen in my own heart.
Yeah.
And that's where it needs to start. So
I think, and one of the ways that you can do that, of course, spending time in the Word. But as you do that, you read about Jesus and you get a revelation of who He is, and something comes alive in your heart to understand and to know more of who Jesus is.
Yeah.
And that fuels a desire, and so God shows up and more as we draw near to Him, He draws close to us. And all of this has kind of prompted us to go on a journey of digging into John chapter 4. And the incredible thing about that is, as we were talking about John 4, suddenly we saw in a couple of other places, others are also digging into that chapter and starting to open it up. So I wonder if there's not something in that. And
it's always very encouraging when you feel led to something and then you see other people have been led to the same passage. It's really cool.
And in there you read the story about Jesus, the woman at the well, and just the way He interacts with her. It creates in me at least a deeper desire to know, like, I want to know more about Jesus and the way that He treats people.
Yeah.
Then He goes on to speak about worship, and we're going to dig into that. And after that, speaks about the harvest that's ripe, and how there's joy in the harvest. It's hard work, but there's joy in the harvest, and sowing and reaping. And then the chapter finishes with healing and miracles. So it's kind of like this desire for Jesus that leads to a lifestyle of worship that leads to being involved in the work of the harvest, and then that leads to seeing miracles happen.
Yeah, and even the individual story of the woman, she's broken and outcast and damaged and whatever. And we could find ourselves there, but then Jesus restores purpose to her.
Yeah.
He gives her purpose to go out and tell everybody else. And that's our desire for people, is to let them encounter Jesus and then find their purpose within whatever Jesus is calling them to, and go out and live out their God-given purpose. So it's so close to our hearts, that story, actually.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful story of restoration and redemption. We were talking last night with our life group about how if you go back to Genesis chapter 33 and 34, it tells of the same location of Jacob's well. But that's a tragic story where Jacob's daughter Dinah is taken advantage of by a man called Shechem who lives in the city. So Dinah's brothers go and they, under false pretenses, make a treaty with the men in the city and say, look, we will be, you will intermarry with your people, but you have to get circumcised. So all the men in the city agree and they get circumcised. And when they're all in pain, 3 days later, two of the brothers, Simeon and Levi, come in and they kill all the men in the city. And there's a parallel, so same location, and the one story is how a woman is abused, taken advantage of, and because of that evil, the whole city is destroyed. And then fast forward to the New Testament, John chapter 4, Jesus comes to the same location. He meets a woman who's been abused, who's been victimized, most likely. But this time he takes that atrocity and turns it into a testimony, and the whole city ends up being saved by her testimony. Yeah,
and it's an incredible thing because we can often see the Bible just in snippets, but God's story of redemption is throughout. The Old Testament is not separate to the New Testament. There's so many beautiful stories of pictures and of how Jesus restores like that, time and time again.
I love it when we start to find ourselves as part of God's story and pray in line with that. God starts to answer prayers. I mean, thinking back over the 1 year, maybe we can wrap up this episode just sharing some of the stories of things that have happened during this year. Remember, right in the beginning, we were like, we short some drummers, but we didn't have many drummers.
We didn't have any.
And we didn't have any drummers, and we got together and we prayed. We said, God, will you send us drummers? And within a couple of weeks, I think there were 3 or 4 drummers arrived.
Yeah.
Recently we were talking about, God, we need some harvesters for the harvest who have experience in pastoral counseling and those kind of things. And all of a sudden people have begun to show up who have experience in that area, and doors opening for training and equipping in it. So God is providing everything that's needed to build His church.
Yeah, and I love, right in the beginning of the year last year, I asked some of the youth, what do you want youth to look like? And they said, we want authentic relationships that's not just see each other on a Sunday, but that are friendships throughout the week. And we're seeing that now where the youth are on WhatsApp, they're making plans, they're hanging out, there's a deep connection and friendship, which was a cry in our heart, which has led to an actual reality. And it's a beautiful thing to see their relationships, their friendships grow and deepen.
Yeah, it's amazing. There's so many other stories. I mean, maybe a couple more quickly. There was someone got hold of us on our website a couple of months back and said they're in a shelter in Johannesburg CBD. Could we help with some financial assistance? And with these kind of requests, you never quite know, like, is this someone trying to take advantage, trying to take a chance, or is this a genuine story? And we began to engage with the person on WhatsApp, and they sent through their CV and told their story and all these kind of things. So we were able, through the generosity of people in Free Church, to come alongside this person and assist them with some financial aid. And then we encouraged them, go to a church in Joburg that we knew and go and meet with the people there. We gave them some names. So the person went along to the church, connected with the people in the church, got some help from them. He ended up going for a job interview through using the Wi-Fi in the church office, and then got the job. And then sent me the letter of appointment, and you wouldn't believe it, but at the bottom of the letter of appointment, the HR director was my HR director from about 10 years ago in the corporate environment. I mean, what are the chances of all the companies in Gauteng, this person lands at a completely different industry to what I was. Same HR director. Yeah. So I sent the HR director a message. I said, hey, I just wanted to tell you the story of how God has connected the dots. And we've seen so many of those kind of things through the year, and I think it's
and that's God in the Bible. The God of the Bible is the same God today, connecting stories, everything. Nothing is unimportant, or
it's not a coincidence.
It's not a coincidence.
That's the message title from Sunday Just Gone. It's not a coincidence.
Yeah. So God is still weaving together these redemptive stories. Another story recently was a woman came to me after church one Sunday and said, my family doesn't come to church, and they've got questions, and please would you just pray that they come to church, because I don't know how to answer their questions. And so we sent their names to the prayer team, and the prayer team were praying, and the very next Sunday they were back, and they've kept coming. So I don't know what God's doing, and I still trust for great testimony in that story, but it's just that power of invitation, that power of prayer coming together, and people that didn't want anything to do with the church have been consistently coming to church the last couple of weeks. So
yeah, it's amazing. When God is up to something and moving. Just thinking back to last Sunday, I know there was we had like a powerful response moment at the end of the meeting where God was working, and we asked people to come to the front for different things, and there was someone who didn't come to the front, and two people separately went up to that person and said, like, hey, I just feel like God wants to say this to you, and you may not have come to the front because, whatever the reason was. And said two different people, different times, said exactly the same thing to the person. So when God is speaking, he continues to speak and say the same thing.
Yeah. And, we can walk in obedience to come to the front, but sometimes God knows for whatever reason we're unable, and then he sends people to us.
That's it, right? That's John 4. Jesus meets us where we are at. Mm-hmm. He meets us at the level of our faith. He meets us in our mess, in our brokenness, in our shame, wherever we are. Like, he literally breaks cultural barriers. He does the unconventional thing, the inconvenient thing. He does it for the one to meet the person who he's at.
And the encouragement for that, for us, is that if you see somebody, even if you don't know their name, and you feel on your heart God is saying something to them, to walk across the room and share it. Yeah. Because you could say, maybe I'm wrong, but I felt this. But chances are God is going to do something through that obedience.
That's it, and that's how you grow in faith. Yes. Faith comes through hearing the word of God. How you practically apply that is when you feel like, oh, maybe this is God. Is you give it a go, and suddenly you see, oh wow, that was God, and so you learn to operate within the faith that God stirs in your heart.
More hearing His voice as well.
Yeah. Mm. So many things happening in the life of this church and around the world. God is definitely on the move. I think it's an absolute privilege and honor to be alive at this time and to be part of what God is doing. So I just want to encourage you with whatever it is that you may be facing, going through at the moment. Just remember that Jesus meets you where you're at. He walks across the country for the one, and he breaks cultural barriers and does the difficult things and the inconvenient, the unpopular things.
And his desire is relationship with you. That number one desire is to be in relationship with you.
Relationship, restoration, redemption, to give you a story and a purpose, invite you into that. So be encouraged. Trust that encourages you.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks for joining us today. Trust that this message has encouraged you, and just want to invite you to like and subscribe and share to keep up to date with the latest from Free Church.